So last week we picked up on what Peter Berv has been doing with his rock stars, comedians, and gurus, and this week I've actually brought some books to share, which are from William Quan Judge, and I want to actually look at his body graph and do a little bit of mystical analysis. I've really enjoyed looking at different body graphs of mystics and kind of seeing what we find and what they have in common. And this started about a month ago with Peter Berv when he looked at about 5 or 6 different mystics and gurus and found some really interesting commonalities. So we're going to look at that. Good to see you as well, Pockets. And I know Rachel's just in the other room here. So yeah, so really excited. Is there anything else anyone would like to go into, or shall we dig in right away to William Quan Judge? I know we haven't talked in a while, Lucita. I don't know how you've. I love your blouse, and really good to see you. Well, I'm happy to jump right into it because I'm really excited, and I actually have just been reading all about the life of Judge, and I'll explain why I'm excited in a moment. But I want to give people an unbiased look at him first, and then I'll tell a little bit more about why he may be of interest to those of us in human design more particularly. But in any case, we have this public figures research area here, and we actually have, let me see, here we go. So this is, and hi there, Ricky. Um, I wanted to show also, just as a matter of just very excited to share, so we've just added this audio player feature, which I urge you to check out. It's a really nice way to browse all of our all of the audio. But then the streaming videos, this is actually being updated. This hasn't been updated for a while, just because it's just taken a lot of work and effort to edit and get everything ready and so on. But that's about to be updated in the next couple of days. So I am going to be updating the video archive, but then we're also going to have like at least 100, I think over 100 videos in the streaming videos, and they'll be easier to view and different things like that. So all right, so yeah, and for those just joining, so we're looking at William Quan Judge, and he was a really interesting guy. I actually wrote a little biography of him, and he was one of the co-founders of the Theosophical Society. He was born in Dublin, but then he lived in New York City from around the age of 21. He remained in the U.S. after the other two main founders, Olcott and Blavatsky, left. So for those not familiar with the Theosophical Society, there are a lot of interesting connections between it and human design, not least of which that Ra was studying ray charts, which are basically how you're configured at 5 different levels: the level of personality, of soul, of the physical, the mental, and the emotional. So there are some correlations to human design, but in any case, just a really interesting system in its own right. And he kind of went on to he would lead his own U.S. version of the Theosophical Society after Annie Besant took over and kind of split off with the Theosophical Society Adyar, which was in India. So really interesting guy. We can see right off the bat that he was a 1222 single definition manifester. This time, I actually wonder. So I was having a hard time. For some reason, it wasn't letting me. It was 507. I'm not sure why the UTC was calculating to 532. But then when I read the biographical details, they said he was born sometime between 4 and 6. So we really do have to be careful here. We don't really have the substructure. In fact, maybe I should turn back to this mode. So we don't really have the substructure to go off of to know for sure that we're right here. But it looks like it could be, and I do think the completely open centers are interesting. That's something we saw again and again with Peter Berv's look at the mystics. Was we would see mystics with up to 4 completely open centers. I mean, really a lot of complete openness. And so just the completely open center with no activations whatsoever having some interesting significance. It's some possibility of that person to connect maybe a little more cosmically and impersonally, a little more like a reflector. And only, I mean, not to take that too far, but just in the sense that there is a qualitative difference between having one activation and having none. And that's a different kind of difference between if you have one activation and two or three or four or more. As soon as you have activations, you're in the world of activation. It's like being in the solar world. When there's no activations at all, it's almost like being in the lunar world, and you have this pure reflection. So this pure undefined G center, pure undefined ajna, completely open with no activations. And then his only channel being 1222, and seeing that as a lawyer, that's an interesting one for him. He passed the bar exam at the age of 21, and he immigrated to the U.S., passed the New York State bar exam, became a lawyer in New York City. He would go on to basically perform the legal and other kind of company duties of the Theosophical Society. So this 1222, pure individual, and yet he seemed to be kind of managerial. And you might wonder, how is the individual, how is it able to even in some ways be almost like a zombie for work? He was said to work so much and to just have, in fact, he was so busy that Olcott had to kind of do most of the Theosophical Society meetings at certain points because Blavatsky was so busy writing Isis Unveiled, and Judge was so busy in court. And so I guess you might wonder, why was he so busy? Well, it's interesting. Individual circuitry, I mean, it stays busy in a different way. Collective circuitry is like busy work, sure, or maybe collective logic is like busy improving and busy caring about all these causes and busy doing all these logical practice, self-improvement things and so on. But individual, it's funny because Ra actually said the individual circuitry can be the ultimate zombie, that they can be the ones that are ultimately in the repetitive loop of kind of the grind of just the mundane life. And so I see a lot of 1222s. I knew another 1222 single definition who was basically very much a part of the friend groups and there to be social and so on. I mean, but it is so social, but then it's so moody and it cannot want to be social. And Ra would always joke about the 1222 snapping and kind of going crazy or something because it's been forced into social situations, and everyone kind of thinks it's this really social. Oh, how graceful! What a graceful person, this gate 22, and so on. So as far as that question, Ricky, do we assume that everyone born after 1781 is a nine-centered being? There's not a way to know. Well, I mean, so here's an interesting. I wouldn't assume everyone. I mean, this maybe is a little controversial. So there are some different opinions here. And hey, Ashley, thank you for joining. So we're looking at we're doing kind of William Quan Judge. He was born in 1851. We're going to look at his body graph. But then the question came up of, do we assume that he was nine-centered? Well, I do want to share, this was an interesting one. I hope it might be on Vimeo or YouTube. It was, I think it's shared freely by Yoko Ono. It is the John Lennon Yoko Ono movie that they made together. That she shares it, and it's really enjoyable. And they're basically being interviewed. Here we go. This might be it. But they're being interviewed, and you can see that they seem very much what we would assume, almost like nine-centered archetypes, like elven people or something. And the guy interviewing them, I'm not sure if it's in this one, but the guy interviewing them, he's really accusing John. It's not this guy. This guy seems very nice and fine. Oh, maybe it was this guy. Yeah, I think it's this guy. So this guy is interviewing them, and he's accusing John Lennon of being this terrible person and saying to Yoko Ono, "Shame on you! How can you be with a man that your husband?" Who has long hair and he's never worked a day in his life and all of this stuff. And I just thought, this guy just looks so, what we might call seven-centered. Like, even his features are just so different. They look like aliens. You look at their features, so they're so different. But but it was an interesting question because there's this whole thread of people on Twitter think we're aging faster, right? Or slower, I guess, aging slower. That people used to age faster, and that's this whole kind of pop culture thing where people are basically like, okay, this guy was 24 years old, and they're like, this was a 24-year-old in 1970, or here, you know, these are people in their 40s, I guess. But yeah, same kind of thing. Like this guy just seems. It's not that young people looked older. There were young people. I mean, if you go back to like the poet Novalis, like he looked pretty nine centered. I mean, not to like fetishize some like anime svelte feature or something like that, but if we want to talk about a certain being that is old, that is slow to age or something like that, right? I mean, here's 26 years old. He was 26 years old here. 49 years old here. So yeah, I mean, there it is just people do look very different. These people are, I guess, the same age in these pictures. So, but it's not to say that they were necessarily seven centered as much as maybe they had just still they're still kind of aging faster. I mean, we all still more or less age faster as informed by the earlier life form. So I don't really know how that evolution. I mean, it doesn't make sense that it would just happen overnight. We're in an interregnum. Something Stephen Rebolito said was that it was only by the end of. See, I think that he misunderstood what Ra said. That Ra actually did believe that there was a huge difference at a frequency level before and after the discovery of I guess we would mark like Uranus being 1781, discovery of yeah, March 13th, 1781. So basically, it's not that somebody born right at the stroke of midnight or something somehow has this extra DNA activation. It takes a long time for the DNA to happen to go through. It's more that the framework to receive the new frequencies was already built over the past hundreds and even thousands of years as this slow evolution and slow emergence. So even earlier thinkers had inklings of the value of the emotional intelligence and of the kind of humanists. There were like proto-humanists even in the seven-centered era. And then what happened with the discovery of Uranus is really this very mystical idea that the Maya itself is basically only ever as complex as what's being produced. It's almost like the memory of the past is being produced in every moment, and the frequencies coming in are kind of informing every moment. So all there really is the present. And so there is this interesting idea that once you name something and you have this acknowledgement of it, like, yeah, it didn't really make sense to look at where the, Uranus or Neptune placement is for somebody before 1781. Arguably, it wouldn't even make sense to look where the Neptune placement is for somebody in 1781. I mean, there are interesting things that we now know, so studying those placements, but in terms of its personal value, it's almost as if the people who lived at that time lived in a different Maya. This is something Mike really loves to talk about, so his presence is missed, and I certainly hope you will begin to join us again on Monday nights, because he loves to talk about some of these mystical questions around how is it that this mutation occurred. Obviously, the mutation didn't occur overnight, but the frequency change occurred overnight. And then there are some interesting key dates where Ra liked the date 2012 because that was a date when, if you take the oldest possible lifespan of people who were alive before 1781, say they were alive for around 120 years or 115 years, that puts you around 1900. Then you go that same length again and you're at 2012. So he said that the Mayans basically understood that it was the end of the world, of the seven-centered world, that was basically two full lifespans, because then there would be nobody alive who remembered what the frequency was like of that former time. It's like first the last person dies that carries the frequency of the former time, then the last one dies who carries the memory of the frequency of that time. And at that point, there's no more of that frequency left. So we're in this Plutonic interregnum that really ended around 2012, and that was, but it really up to 2027, and that interregnum from 1781 to 2027 is sort of the last dying off of the seven centered. So Stephen Rebolito interpreted that to mean that there were still seven-centered people among us and that they just weren't interested in human design or something like that. I don't know. It seems like the framework goes into place long before the switch or the trigger is fired. And so the way that things can happen so rapidly is that really we had hundreds of years of humanist value. I mean, there's so much humanism before 1781 as well. And you see a lot of the humanist values that really marked this era, this modern era. You see the inklings of them throughout history and through various acts of compassion and stories and all sorts of things. So I don't think it's just as simple as saying, I mean, that there are still seven centered people out there, because I think the frequency changed. And so even the people, it's an interesting question, like the guy, interviewing John Lennon and Yoko Ono, he looks so different, but looks can be deceiving also. I have to wonder if there were people like that, but I mean, when you look at some of these cases of like, wow, that person was 26 years old and they look like what we would imagine a 40 or 50-year-old, it's almost like there's an unfolding into, and, or, that the centers were almost like developing. I guess you could put it that way. The same way that scientists have found that serotonin production is rampant in the gut biome, and that there's so much activity in the solar plexus area that associates to the solar plexus region that we understand as, so much, mutation is actually happening there. Well, that same observation, that what that's saying is that basically that it's developing, it's really developing. So we all have nine centers. It's just for all of us, these are very much developing, and things that we are getting to experience their function and dysfunction in different ways, and some of their different mutations and so on. So, yeah, it does make me wonder as well. Like, yeah, what are the seven-centered manifestor charts? I mean, there's definitely, they probably would have been, I guess if you just look at the seven chakras, there are different systems that have eight chakras and so on, but you would probably just find like, okay, the throat has to be powered, but not by the sacral. So the throat is really powered by something else, powered by, I guess what would have probably been the heart, or the solar plexus by the anahata or the manipura. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see that. Comment from Ashley regarding taking longer to age, thinking of it in the context of we're not adults till 40. The human design points were to us becoming more Uranian, and the seven-centered were Saturnian. Absolutely, absolutely. We're on the same page there. And all I was kind of pointing out, I guess, was that it's hard to really say, like did people start to live longer? I mean, it's taken a while for people to start to live longer. Life expectancy in the 1800s was still fairly low in most of the industrialized world. So yeah, it's an interesting question. Now, I have some books by Judge. I want to just look at his body graph just a little more and just kind of try to imagine. Now, there's a really interesting, as well, I want to kind of just kind of point out an interesting thought experiment. And this is something that's come up for me quite a bit. So if you try to imagine the personality crystal as distinct from the body graph, including the personality activations, what you imagine is really that there is a distinct personality. I mean, this personality crystal that incarnates and decarnates and reincarnates and re-decarnates and so on, again and again, coming into different forms, each time maintaining the same base, the same perspective, the same fundamental quality or characteristic that you can learn to identify as that. Yes. Any questions or comments? I'd love to hear what you have to say, Ricky, if there's...
Um, I just forgot it.
Oh, it's okay.
Oh no, no, okay. Yes, the soul. versus the personality crystal? That's what I'm, you
Well, it's a
know,
good question because in Theosophy they used both terms. They said there's a personality and a soul. And I wonder if they used the soul to mean the design crystal and if that is a more appropriate use of the term. I mean, this is really a great question. Ra liked to talk about the two souls that the Phoenicians observed and say that we basically have two souls as well, the personality and the design crystal. That could be equivalent to the eternal soul and the temporal soul, that is the soul of the body. I mean, it's a really good question. So yeah.
but I missed the very first part of what you said. So who said there's,
So Ra loved the story of the Phoenicians because where he lived in Ibiza, the Phoenicians have. I mean, there's all sorts of ruins and statues and things everywhere, and the Phoenicians actually had a burial ritual where they would do two separate burial rites, one for the eternal soul, so to speak, and one for this other soul, and basically Ra admired them and said, wow, they actually understood there is a personality crystal and a design crystal. They're two
oh,
different things. The personality crystal keeps reincarnating, it keeps coming back. The design crystal is something like the soul of the form, the body, and it does go back to the earth. So it's like there's a yin soul and a yang soul, if you will. But I mean, I don't know. When people use the term soul, like the Theosophers said there's a personality and a soul. And they saw the personality and the soul as having two different fundamental qualities. This is in their Ray chart, where because he's a Theosopher, I think this would be instructive, maybe interesting for everyone just to see a little bit. So, and I can actually read a little bit from this and from the other works of Judge because he was a really interesting guy and really wrote a lot about. I mean, he actually wrote about the kinds of analysis that Ra himself would later be reading on, Ibiza shortly before his encounter with the voice. So, but one of the things that they study in, I mean, there's basically 5 levels that they study, and to me, they correlate to the personality, the design, the spleen, ajna, and the solar plexus, kind of like that. And yeah, here's I mean, really nice books, really nice editions. This actually says mechanical theosophy.
no.
So the earnest, devoted student can hardly believe that there exist any theosophists. So I see. He's basically he's always like surprised people don't believe it. He's like, how can anyone deny theosophy? But I was going to try to find something interesting if he has anything kind of relevant because it is a good question and this is kind of an earlier. I really love this book has some really nice edition kind of stuff here. But yeah, I mean it's a lot of understanding of the different layers of basically what they would call different bodies. So they say there's a physical body, but there's also a mental body and an emotional body. And I think if we look at what the real story of the emergence of the nine-centered being is, it's the movement into an emotional awareness and the solar plexus mutation and all of these things that really they were kind of a part of because, I mean, this was in the 1800s. This was definitely in the nine-centered era, and these were nine-centered people. They just didn't necessarily have the luxury of having, human design
It makes me
like we
think
have. Yeah.
the ancients, with, in terms of astrology, it makes me think of how they describe the spirit versus the soul.
Right, the
Like
spirit being the
spirit
personality.
ascends and the
Yeah,
soul descends. Um,
absolutely, absolutely. That's a really great point. And here I'm going to unpin my screen here, so when people talk, we can have more of an open discussion. I would love to, I see the personality as having some connection to what people understand as spirit as well, because it is really the personality principle that is the principle behind the spiritist traditions, and it is the realm of the spirit, whether it's ghosts or any of that, that is the personality realm because that's what reincarnates. So there's no ghosts of design crystals, floating around, right? It's personality crystal bundles. So it's kind of an interesting point there as well. Yeah. So okay, let me see if I have any other interesting things from Judge here, and then we can also talk a little bit more about. Well, I'll show maybe perhaps after we look a little more at his body graph why I'm so interested in him. And yeah, these are a couple books of his letters that have helped me, volumes 1 and 2. And then The Ocean of Theosophy. And I've actually been interested in him for a while. I've read his works at different times, but I became more interested when I found out that there's a community online of reincarnation researchers who actually have him listed. Because, I mean, first of all, what an obscure mystic for people to be, interested in. But then, here, let me share my desktop here. But also just who they have him listed as. So let me show you. Some of you may already know this. And these are not people I know. I don't have any connection to these people. This is a guy named Walter Simku who kind of has his own research website where he looks into reincarnation, and he actually has Ra listed as William Quan Judge. So it's an interesting question. I know that Ra did comment once in his talk on the Uru about his past life and said something very bizarre, which is that he shared a past life. He had a past life in common, or they shared a body with the man who came to him during his encounter with the voice and brought him the Uru. Not sure what to make of that, but yeah, so kind of an interesting thing. But personality-wise, they do have certain similarities. So I guess this raises the question: how do we distinguish what is a personality trait versus what are the traits of the body graph? And I think we have to just understand that the body graph is mechanical, but that the personality is very different. And actually, there are two ways to approach it. One is to look for past lives, and then you look at two different body graphs, right? Like we could compare William Quan Judge's body graph to Ra and
Just
say,
to
wow, they
clarify,
had.
we're talking about the personality crystal, not anything about the
Yeah,
personality,
not the
right?
personality activations. That's why I'm saying it's so tricky to
Okay,
disentangle the
right,
two,
right.
because I
Okay.
think this is actually really valuable. And there's two approaches. So the first approach is look at William Quan Judge, then look at Ra. Okay, interesting. Then the second approach, and this is something I'm going to be putting in the research center here, is going to be looking. I'll do a little special section here or something where it'll say showcase on basically chart twins. So someone like Larry David, the comedian and writer for Seinfeld, July 2nd, 1947, and Richard Lewis, the comedian. Uh, okay, I see. They're born a few days apart. So June 29th to July 2nd. But they're still very substantially type, kind of twins almost, right? It's so interesting. And they're actually good friends in real life, and they have such close. But it'd be interesting to look at, like, I know two guys who were born just hours apart who are actually close friends. Or in my case, I'm only born a few hours apart from Donald Glover, for instance. So to look at our two body graphs and to say, wow, these guys have such different personalities, there are certain commonalities. Richard Lewis and Larry David do have certain commonalities, and they have almost identical personality activations, except for, of course, line. And I mean, of course, when we get into substructure, and we can see just how diverse humanity is. But my point is, if you find very close body graphs with different personalities, what that allows you to do is to kind of distinguish what is the personality as distinct from the body graph. And that's an interesting question, because we have the personality activations, but it's like, obviously our personalities are more than just the sum total of these activations. I mean, I, you know, I have gate 26, so I can have a smarmy, fun kind of. But see, people who have that on the design side, they have that quality as well. It's part of them. It comes out. I mean, I pick up on the design activations just as much as the personality. In fact, the design activations are seen just as much by everybody else. They're just not really seen by the person who has them. So I guess my point is just the personality and the design activations are both fundamental mechanical aspects of the aura. They're like how the aura is configured. It's almost like what kinds of neurotransmitters, what kind of chemical cocktail that person is producing, and being an aura with them, what you're going to get from them, what you're going to kind of, and, are you getting that anger from them? Are you getting that peace from them? And so seeing the body graph from one perspective, the life force energy and the potentials, the dormant potentials for various recipes, for various alchemical recipes, right? That can produce various chemical mixes of anger and peace. In fact, I have a manifestor friend who was just told recently that she brings a lot of peace. And this was by somebody who doesn't know human design. And it almost made her cry. She was so happy to hear that because she does really try to bring peace, and she actively can't rest when there's not peace. It's like her anger is being stuck in a place where there isn't peace and not being able to do something about it to make the peace happen. But I guess what I'm trying to say is looking at the design that way and seeing, okay, certain aspects, the personality, that's going to be something where it's almost like the personality itself is creating that, is exemplifying that quality. So for instance, I have gate 58, line 1, this very love of life, joyous celebration, and basically the puppy dog energy of loving, making things better, and loving, improving things, and all of that. And just as an example, that's on the design side for me. I don't have that in my personality. I don't have a personality that acts like that. That's, hey guys, oh, I'm so excited, But my design is absolutely excited. It's ready to take action, or at least to fuel any process that is, required. So I guess all I'm trying to say is differentiating between personality and design, as it's almost that the personality crystal is working with the personality, being imprinted by the personality, taking on the characteristics of that personality in this life. And so it is fair to say that this is the personality and this is the imprinting of the personality crystal. At the same time, the design side imprinting that's not part of the personality can still be expressed through that person, through their aura, through who they are and how they act, even in a way that they might not notice themselves that they've done it. I have unconscious gate 34, line 3. It can be very macho. Well, I don't notice when I'm being macho. Someone tells me, wow, you were really macho with that person. I was? I don't know. I just automatically got really tough with them. I don't even know why, That's the design side. So it's not that because it's on my design side that my personality had nothing to do with it, although I do think that Steve Rhodes has a really interesting observation, which is that the design side tends to be things that we use our body for, and the personality side tends to be things we use our mind for, such as remembering, conversing, communicating, thinking aloud, all sorts of talking, that there is a real difference between personality and design in that respect. I mean, I have unconscious throat gates, so I just talk without really my personality being that involved. Actually, that's how it seems to me. But I do kind of see his point that there are certain times where interpreting a bodily association to the design side is useful. And it's really just asking ourselves what interpretive value that adds, because really human design is so vast and so multi-level that it might be really useful at one level and not another. As an example, someone who has tones 3 or 4 on the design side Sun Earth versus tones 3 or 4 on the personality. For Steve Rhodes, there's a huge difference there where like the tones on the design side are things that you're using your body for. So tones 3 and 4 are gaining respect. So really snappy dressers really care how they're dressed because they want people to admire and respect how well they're dressed, how physically fit they are, what good actors they are, what any of the ways that you can be impressive physically, what good chefs they are, what good drivers they are, and martial artists, and all the things you do with your body. But if it's on the personality side, which is what I have, and also what Ra had, then that would be somebody who wants to be respected for their oratorial, or their thinking, or their ideas, or their intellectual curiosity, or generosity, or any of these mind-based things, respected for their memory, respected for how much they know, respected for their awareness. I mean, so basically it is valuable to distinguish between personality and design, and to ask ourselves what value we can add by understanding some of the associations there, like design to the body and personality to the mind. And there is value there is, but also, I mean, it's not important to just always, like, or it's hard, I guess, to interpret, like, oh, I have a design 61.5 compared to a personality 61.5. Well, actually, first of all, isn't that interesting that William Quan Judge had a fifth line 61.5? That is, whereas Ra had the 61.1. Yeah. Yeah, interesting body graph. But I guess I'm just saying that there are two ways that we can kind of identify the personality as distinct, or the personality crystal as distinct from the personality activations that it is imbued with. And one would be to look at past lives where you see, wow, yeah, this person obviously has a very different personality from Ra. Ra had integration circuitry. So for Ra's mission to be equipped for receiving human design, he had to come in splenic, and he had to come in with a defined ego to have the willpower, and with a defined G-center to have his compass to know where to go and to know what to do, and he had to come in with his defined ajna and his 4323, and he had to come in on shock with 51 so he could survive the encounter with the voice, and with all the first lines to absorb so much. And then Judge had a very different job. William Quan Judge had to establish the Theosophical Society in America, and he had to speak all the time, also a manifestor job. He had this oratorial ability. He had to be a lawyer, but also individual, pure individual, but no integration, no spleen, no G-center, none of that. I mean, it's just kind of interesting what people are equipped with, and seeing that the personality is equipped also, just like the design is, to fulfill its purpose, and that the personality sun is a little hint for what that purpose is going to be in that life, because of course that sun line is going to be basically the key to the profile and to the incarnation cross. And so what that project for that lifetime was, and what that you kind of came into that life equipped with, as distinct from the personality crystal itself, which has a project over many different lifetimes. And it would make sense that because Judge was one of the three primary founders of the Theosophical Society, that if Judge was also a life of Ra's, that when he came back as Ra, he came to bring us human design. I mean, that there are actually purposes. I mean, we don't have to be so nihilistic. I mean, Ra was about as nihilistic as you could get, and even he had to admit that he really was fulfilling his purpose as a clarion, which was to announce the closing of the door and the end of an era, and sort of the last mysticism and the end of mysticism. And he was really there to initiate us into the awakening of being ourselves, and all of that. Very different for someone like Judge, who at that point in the 1800s was just trying to establish something different. But both of them being manifestors, now that to me doesn't say, oh, that people always reincarnate as the same type. It's just, what project do you have in that life? Even if you're not looking at reincarnation or making the connection of one person having been somebody else, just looking at a life, just looking at an actual life where somebody really was historically notable, like how Judge really did establish this mystical system. I mean, obviously with others, but really did play a pivotal role. And then you look at type, and you start to deepen your own understanding of how that type was necessary for that person to do that. So Carl Jung had to be a generator. He couldn't have been a manifester because he had to do this body of work of seeing patients and analyzing tens of thousands of dreams and all of this stuff. And he had to just build, build, build. But you see that manifestors, well, they have a different way of doing things. And you start to see like, okay, that person's purpose is not necessarily peace. Peace is the reward for fulfilling their purpose, because when you operate according to how that channel is designed really to operate, right? But you can only really do that. It's like this catch 22 where you can only fulfill your purpose when you're living your design appropriately. So you have to follow strategy and authority to do that, because that's getting in touch with the movement of life, once again. And so to me, it's kind of like Judge didn't have a defined G. He didn't know what to trust. He was here to become wise about which way to go and what to do. He had a lot of openness. Look at all that openness. And to be thrown into the world and have all that openness, but then to have the 1222, which is the life force energy that gives him strategy and authority, which basically says you must share the way you feel about things, and you must be social and connect to others. You're sent as the kind of Trojan horse of individual mutation to get out there and befriend people and get the mutation out into the world. And ultimately, he's designed to be able to actually do that and then to leave, not only with the third line breaking the bond, but because the 1222 itself is designed to leave, and how manifestors themselves have this kind of fundamental leaving after their work is done. And so he really was there to sort of get in, have his impact, do his work, and get out. And that was really the only thing that could guide him. It wasn't his job to figure out where to go. It wasn't his job to do all of these things. He had a very specific job to do. It would be interesting to look at 42 line 3 and the right angle cross of the Maya as well, and to kind of try to relate that to what he actually did with the Theosophical Society. But definitely the fact that that incarnation cross has gate 61, and that also this is an internalization theme of the current global cycle, that we always talk about the cross of planning, but the cross of planning is only the externalization. There's also an internalization theme of each time, and that is the Maya. Now, as far as Ricky saying whether the design crystal returns, no, it does not. It does not at all. The design crystal is used once, and then it returns to the bundle that it came from, the design crystal bundle, but it does not reincarnate again. Yeah, it doesn't
No,
return.
the question was the soul, like the soul that lives in the G center.
Well,
If that
the G center is the magnetic monopole, and it's maybe you could think of it as our connection. So, okay.
gate 2, right? Like gate 2, they
Yeah,
say
actually,
like that's where the soul is, right? Is that where the magnetic
I have the
monopole
G
is?
center right here. So the magnetic monopole is in the G center. The design crystal is in the ajna, and the personality crystal is above. And what happens in the moment of death is the design crystal connects to the magnetic monopole, which it has wanted to unite with basically forever. It's like the true inner love story of the inner conjunctio, the inner alchemical union of the opposites. And then that actually leaves through, I guess, gate 60, or through a hidden 65th gate that basically goes into the Earth's mantle. And so the design crystal returns to the yin bundle. Meanwhile, the personality crystal sticks around for the Bardo experience. And that Bardo experience can take up to 72 hours, during which time that personality crystal is basically getting the most incredible passenger experience you can have, because it's the experience of being a personality that doesn't have a design crystal. It's like when we're alive, the personality crystal is getting the experience of being in a body, and that's a really cool experience to be in the body. And part of that experience is that the design crystal in the ajna is actually working with every design crystal in every cell in the entire body through resonant frequencies and so on to orchestrate the movement of the whole body. Yeah, you could think of like watching a ballet dancer, and they're taking all these pirouettes and all of this movement, and you can imagine that inside every cell that's being produced thousands of times a second, there is what we call tone, that there's a design crystal in every cell, and the tone is the inside of the design crystal that actually has a little holographic image of that totality, and it's coming out through color. And that's why when the color as the exit frequency of the design crystal in every cell is not transferred, the person can move in a very they move in a way that it's almost as if the tone is all working so perfectly. There's kind of this magical quality to it. So that's how I see it. Is basically there's the design side is really the body and the cells. The personality is experiencing that at the moment of death, right at the moment of death, as soon as death happens, instantaneously at death, the actual thing that death is the design crystal leaving. So the design crystal leaves, goes into the Earth's mantle. That person is dead. However, the personality crystal is still experiencing, and it gets up to 72 hours of additional experience, but it needs the electrical activity of the brain and the brainstem and things like that to still function. Somehow, it still needs that to be able to produce the Bardo experience. So that's kind of the idea, and then the personality crystal waits and either becomes a rogue crystal bundle or gets picked up and goes back to its Godhead bundle. But the idea is really just that the personality crystal comes back again and again, and that even though it's getting imprinted each time new, it's not that the old imprint is still sticking around. It's not that like Ra still had some of the imprint of the 42.5 or the 61.5 or any of that. That's wiped clean. It's more just that there are certain personalities that you can see echo through the ages or develop through the ages. Like the personality crystal is reused. So, I mean, in some sense, it's obviously a very different person, but it's also. But I mean, Ra himself said that he understood very well that he was a composite, that he was no longer Alan Robert Krakauer, that he wasn't even just Ra, he was Ra Uru, and basically the Uru was this other crystal. So he actually had an extra crystal of consciousness, which was kind of just like, for us, we can communicate with our own unconscious, and that's already an incredible achievement to communicate with our own unconscious, to have some sort of, you know what I mean? Like to have some idea and then in a dream the answer comes to you. Like that's a beautiful thing. That's a really incredible thing. For Ra, he not only had an unconscious, a design crystal, he also had a third crystal that he would communicate with, and he actually devised a way to communicate with it. So it is an interesting question of how that worked and how Ra really was able to continue developing human design because he had this additional personality crystal that he was in communication with.
I was I was actually wondering about if he said anything about the soul, like the soul that lives in gate 2. The soul that doesn't really have any,
Okay.
very like loosely referred to in human design, right? It's or
Well, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't. It's a good question. I mean, I don't think.
I'm just wondering if he said anything about it. We don't have to like
No, I don't know
imagine.
about. I don't know of any of that. And I mean, it's definitely the G center feels like a strong connection to. I mean, it's a spiritual connection. I guess you could say a soul kind of feeling. I do think spirit being yang and soul being yin is an association that Ra does make sometimes. So gate 2 being fully yin, all yin lines, does make sense. There is also an incredible essay by James Hillman called Peaks and Veils, which was actually a talk he gave. And I think you can find it online as a PDF. It's easy to find around, but it's called Peaks and Veils. And basically, he says that what Hillman's saying is he wants to disentangle the language from spirit and soul, that people use the terms interchangeably, but actually, spirit is, to Hillman, what we in human design would call more of a personality type language, and that it's all about the superiority of the mind and the will of the individual and achievement over adversity and so on, basically to triumph, to reach some spiritual peak or mountaintop where one is clean of all impurities of the world and all of these things. And then the veil, the valley, he basically looks at poetry and things like the Vale of Tears and the idea of the valleys where we get mired in the complexities of the emotional and all of that. and looks at that as what actually relates to soul. And it would seem to relate more to the design side and to the unconscious and things like that. So we have to be careful in the associations, but I do think, yeah, it's interesting. Like I actually did a talk, spirit and soul in human design. That was actually one of my talks last year because it's such an interesting topic to me. Of well, we say that the G center is the center of spirit, but how do we understand the spirit, the soul, what these things mean? Yeah, these are really good questions. So, as far as your question about the gates that came online, my own. So Rob kind of refused to look into that. He said, well, we have thousands of years of seven centered chakra systems to look into. Just study those systems if you want to learn that. However, my understanding that I've developed is just that the same 64 gates were in the wheel, right? The wheel didn't change. The wheel's always had 64 gates. So we have to understand what it means to actually have a gate in a body graph. And this is really a much longer conversation, but I understand the gates in the body graph as basically being configurable by the time of birth. And anything that's not configurable by the time of birth must be configurable some other way, genetically or something, right? So the thought experiment that I would say, if you're really interested in the seven-centered being, start with the five-centered. We have the five-centered being. We know that it has 15 gates. We know what those gates are. We know that it doesn't have a lot of gates. Furthermore, a lot of the gates it doesn't have are very easy to associate with different animals. And those different animal species, for instance, cats and dogs, like earlier I was saying gate 58, so joyful. Well, that's a very dog-like gate compared to gate 18, a very cat-like gate. Something Ra himself said, that he would say 58 is like dogs and 18 is like cats. Now, that might be more literal than we realize if we associate those gates to their amino acids. And then we realize all life forms, from field mice to fruit flies, all the way up to humans, all life forms have the same basic fundamental amino acids, and so on, right? They might have different essential amino acids. All that means is that they need to get it from their diet, but the same 20, 22, if you include the two synthesized ones of the life code, basically these amino acids existed in cats and dogs and everything. So but then what's interesting is those amino acids you can also associate to certain neurotransmitters, certain hormones, certain, right? There's all these really interesting connections you can make. Like certain amino acids are they play a role in the production of serotonin versus something else. Well, if you look at dogs and the quality of dogs and just how happy and cheerful they are, what if it's almost like they have gate 58 always turned on? Not literally in their aura, but in their DNA. And that cats don't have gate 58 always turned on. They have gate 18 always turned on, in a way. Not in their aura, but just like they're producing the neurotransmitters so that they're constantly in a psychic world or a psychological world that is heavily critical of everything around them. I don't know how else to describe that, right? A splenic world, or maybe they're more gate 57, I guess, attuned to the auditory. But you start to then say, okay, well, there's no ego, right? We don't have an ego in the five-centered being, and yet the qualities of courage, we actually attribute those qualities to the lion, for instance. So I guess all I'm saying, and yeah, why some cats are like dogs, yeah. Well, and it's also just wondering, here's the other question, and I see that as well, Ashley, that gate 58s love dogs. I sure do. Yeah, I sure do. But I also love cats. I mean, in the same way that dogs love cats, I guess. But it's just, I guess my only point is, it's still a mystery to me, but obviously each of the 64 gates correlates to an amino acid. Obviously, those amino acids are present in the five-centered being. So them missing the gate, not having the gate, doesn't mean they don't have the amino acid. What if it's the amino acid production and things like that are simply characteristics that are determined genetically by their breed and their breeding? And what if humans have literally no characteristics that are determined by our genetics and by our breeding? Because we're nine-centered, we have all 64 gates, so we're fully customizable. So literally, there is no such thing as race for us, or there is no such thing as species for us. but for a five-centered being, sure, absolutely, there's a difference between a dog and a cat. So anyway, interesting conjectures to be sure. Well, I think I didn't really get into any of the other books from Judge, but hopefully at the least I've gotten people interested in reading him if they are interested in esoteric texts from the 1800s. You can find his books all online for free because they are all public domain. And you can find most of the Theosophical stuff for free. And yeah, I mean, obviously, studying human design, there's such a vast amount of knowledge to go. I wouldn't say that you need to study Theosophy or any other system. I do see Theosophy as having some interesting connection to human design, one that has not been fully explored, but one that is hinted at by Ra himself and commented on at various times, and certainly one that I've enjoyed looking into. So don't be sorry for questions at all. I mean, these would be very short if we didn't have questions, because all I really came prepared with was having looked at Judge's chart a little bit. So I'm happy to talk about anything else anyone would like to get into. Otherwise, we can wrap up in a little bit here. I know that Mike is done traveling, and I'm hoping to get him back on Mondays because he hopes to join soon. He'll also be back on the radio this week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, which will be great. Make sure to check out the new feature that I mentioned of the audio player. So this is just a cool little audio player, and it lets you listen to everything that we have so far as audio. And I'll be getting the video player very soon as well. But yeah, for those who haven't seen it yet, this is our full audio archive, and I'm happy to help you. I guess like Lasita or anyone else who hasn't gotten on this website, make sure just shoot me a message and I will get you set up. So, because this is our full audio archive and just gives you things to listen to, you can kind of click around, and then here's the player, or if you prefer to download to listen on your device or something like that, you can do that. And those are all available on the Google Drive as well. But yeah, really excited to roll out a bunch of more features soon, and as well as new programming. And so if there's anything people want to see for Catalyst, we're going to keep Catalyst going as kind of just an open, just like, it's just easy. If someone has a topic that they want to do, we can do it. But I also want to get more in depth on the programming. So I have some fun ideas for series to do, actually. So I'll be working more on series. And if anyone has anything that they're interested in as a series, please let me know. Definitely, I'm always down to build tools as well. Like this was something we looked at last week a little bit, which shows hotspots in the chart. Unfortunately, I can't show the hotspots for William Quan Judge because it only shows body graphs I've added, and he's in the research area. But yeah, and if there's anyone that you want to see covered as well, anyone whose body graph you want to look at. Just the other day, I looked at Donald Glover, and that was fun, just because his body graph is so similar to mine. So it was interesting to compare. We have almost all the same activations, although he has gate 38. The moon is what had moved, and so he has the spleen there. All right, but yeah, if there's any cards as a series would be fun, and then raw audio is available on the player. No, we can't have anything copyrighted. So what I will have is commentaries on Ra's audios that I myself have made. And I also, this player just kind of has everything right now, but one of the cool things we're going to do is actually have links, like when you're in the research center and you're in the amino acid section, it will link to an audio talking about amino acids. Or when you're on Trent Reznor, it'll link to the audio of when we talked about Trent Reznor. So I'm actually adding the ability to kind of add extra links and things like that, and the same for videos. And so that way, as this grows over time, you'll be able to look at a channel, and then you'll look at the channel with the alpha, and actually there's a talk on it. That's cool. James Alexander did something on that, or you'll be able to kind of see links as well. So it's all very much in progress, but I'm very open to suggestions and really enjoying building this out. I've had such a blast putting all these features into the website. I agree, cards as a series would be fun. And so, yeah, I think I will do a few non-human design kind of special interest things where we'll just probably put like we've talked about doing a movie, kind of once a week movie. I might do a card night or at least a card monthly. Maybe there's enough interest to do a weekly. I mean, we could do a card weekly, and we could just kind of look at different aspects of the system each week, and that might be interesting, at least for 6 or 8 weeks or something. So I'm working on it right now, and I'll definitely be announcing some new weeklies, and I appreciate that, Pockets. Thank you for that suggestion, because I would definitely personally enjoy that. So, all right. Well, if anyone has anything else that they want to talk about, I'm open to it. Otherwise, thank you all for coming, and hope you can enjoy checking out Theosophy if you ever want to go down that rabbit hole. There are a lot of similarities to human design. They seem to be talking, I mean, they use the term personality. Um, it's really interesting learning about the different rays, because you can even ask yourself and kind of wonder what ray you might be in different areas. And of course, the areas that they associate are also very similar to human design. Their symbol is a triangle, and it's physical, mental, and emotional, which is spleen, ajna, solar plexus. So yeah, if you're interested, check it out. Always happy to talk about this stuff on text on Discord as well throughout the week, so you can always post comments on there. Thank you, Lucida, Pockets, Ricky, Rachel, Marissa, Hanifa, and Christine. Yeah, thank you so much. Take care.